Welcome to the White Sox Recap Podcast. I am Ryan McGuffey. All right, we're off into the new year. It is 2025. Time to look forward. Spring training is only a month away. But most importantly, and to some chagrin out there with White Sox fans, SoxFest is back. We are just a week and a half as we record this from SoxFest, returning for the first time in 5 years. A lot has happened since the last time there was SoxFest. The last SoxFest, the energy, the buzz was palpable. Ricky Renteria was the manager. Tim Anderson had just won the Hank Aaron Award. We are 4 managers from there. We have had Ricky. We have had Tony. We have had Pedro. And now we have Will Venable. The roster is completely overturned, and the White Sox are coming off the worst season in Major League Baseball history. The format has changed. BA and I, Brian Anderson, is back on the podcast. We're going to answer your questions, the questions that you would ask and want asked at SoxFest. If there was an opportunity to do a Q&A with White Sox GM Chris Getz and manager Will Venable and maybe others in White Sox brass, what would you ask? The submissions were plenty. We went through them, combed through the best, and Brian Anderson and I are here to answer the questions that you'd ask on the return of White Sox Fest. SoxFest 2025 is back. It's coming, and we have the answers to your questions right now on the White Sox Recap Podcast. All right, BA, welcome back, man. Good to see you. Happy New Year. Hopefully the holiday season was good for you and your family, but really good to see you, brother.
It's been great. A lot going on. It's a lot of moving parts, but again, grateful. Like you said, man, a lot of great things going. I'm sure the fans are eager for the season to start, but more importantly, I think they're more excited about grilling Chris Getz, man.
Yeah. Well, we had him here in the studio just a week ago, and, you know, we held him to the fire. I mean, some people don't think so, but the questions that had to be asked were asked. You know, what's the plan? Why should fans care? Will you sign a $100 million player? What have you been done? I really enjoyed the way he answered some of the questions. And he said, quite frankly, a lot of people aren't going to like my answers because they're behind the scenes. It's infrastructure. And he's right. People just want, who's the 30 homer guy? Why aren't we spending? How are we getting out of this? And they don't have patience to do this again. So we gave fans, when you and I were texting, like, let's talk about SoxFest. It's returning. There should be some excitement. Some people are not all that excited about the format changing at the Ramova Theater, a smaller venue. It's called SoxFest Live. It's from 5 to 9 p.m. on Friday and Saturday night. But I think the idea that it's back, and before we get to some of these questions, BA, you were a part of so many SoxFest. The energy in those rooms, meeting the fans, it's kind of like the kickoff to spring training because it's just a few weeks away. You start to get that, okay, we're back. Fans are excited. Maybe the excitement's not there, but I think it's important. To me, it's important that SoxFest is back, period. Whatever the format is, however it's perceived, let's see what happens. Like, get this one in and out. Let's judge it after the fact. But it's so important that SoxFest is back.
Yeah, I mean, the buzz of the Palmer House back in the day was crazy. I mean, it gave us a chance as teammates to get together like right before spring training. But I can't believe they haven't had one in 5 years. I knew it was a few, but, you know, I thought about that time frame. And that's like when you're in like middle school and you get your ass kicked and you transfer schools, like you're so embarrassed or something, or like you're avoiding it so bad. Or like, you know, you shit your pants if you're like in 3rd grade and you beg your parents to transfer schools or not go back to school. I'm like, what? They must not have wanted to do it for a multitude of reasons. But again, like, this is something that you could do right by the fans. Every team does it. Chicago is such a great town, and those fans, they won't hold back. But I think that they'll get some clarity moving forward, which is always great.
Yeah. So let's get to it. We asked fans to submit their questions that they would ask if they had the opportunity at SoxFest. And isn't it crazy, though, by the way, that they've had 4 managers. If you count Ricky since the last SoxFest, Ricky Renteria 2020, Tony La Russa 21, and 22. 23, we had Pedro Grifol, and now we have Will Venable.
It's like the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation.
It really, really is. All right. Question number 1. It came from Little Brian Anderson on Twitter here. Why wasn't I invited to SoxFest? This is the 20th anniversary of the 2005 White Sox. There are a few guys that are going to be there, Mark Burley included, not the whole team, and it's the 125th anniversary of the White Sox organization. Brian Anderson, why weren't you invited to SoxFest?
I mean, White Sox clearly are on a budget. You know, they would have had to pay for my my gas, which is like 58 cents a mile. So that'd have been $7 since I lived down the street. But, you know, I think from what I read, it was more of a quaint, intimate gathering. And I wasn't too offended. If I would have saw Konerko and Jermaine start coming in, Pasenik, I would have been like, hey, wait a minute. That text would have been sent out to Getzy real quick.
All right. So we have a Landon G asked like 50 questions within a 4 response to actually more than that, more than 4 responses. There literally are like 50 questions. I'm not going to answer all of them. Okay. But I'm going to sum up a few of these with the Chris Getz podcast we did last week. Why should we believe you? Will you spend $100 million on a player? And even if the team is competitive in 2027 or whenever, how do we trust that Jerry won't meddle and put another crony in the manager seat again? I'll answer these 3 because go back and listen, Landon, to last week's podcast with Chris Getz. Literally asked him all of those. Literally asked him we talked about Will Venable. We talked about why I literally brought up a question from a friend. I asked the guy before I came in, what do you have to ask Chris Getz? And he said, why should I care? Why should I believe? So Chris Getz, he doesn't answer it with, well, we're going to spend 200 here. We're going to bring in this guy here because it's a waste of money, quite frankly. I want to get your take on this. To spend money right now, and you and I have had a little bit of differing opinions on this. When you're coming off a 41-win season and trying to flip this thing, you're really kind of relaying the foundation. They're going to develop this year. It's going to lead to a lot of losses. There's very few 1-year deals that they've given out. Maybe they add 1 or 2 more. But this is going to be developed at the major league level. And I think some of that's exciting because of some of the names that are coming up, the Colson Montgomerys, the Edgar Carrolls, the Kyle Teals, the pitching staff. We know some of those guys were good last year. Are they going to spend $100 million on a player? It's the last question I asked him at the end of the podcast. He clarifies that by saying, he said, I asked if he'll spend $100 million on a player under his tenure, not this year. And he said, yes. Okay. So your take on that, I think, BA, from what I'm hearing, I think the White Sox payroll could be in the $65 to $70 million range. That's insane.
Yeah, and that's with Benintendi on there too.
Robert.
I mean, Robert was from years back, obviously, but and that was more so a part of the plan they had 5 years ago, where it's like Luis Robert's going to be our 3-hole bat in center field, playing 150 games a year, right? And our vision, our opinions are aligned in that. Hey, you don't have to spend $200 million a year, but I do believe in one thing irrefutably. You have to either be all in on we're rebuilding. We're going to get some prospects, some guys at the minor league level that have really earned an opportunity to come shine and show what the fans they can do. But you have to be able to reward them, and you have to be competitive. One thing that I will never budge on is even when you stink, even when you know it's going to be tough for a year or two, you still have to put a competitive product on the field, and you have to do everything in your power to stay out of the triple-digit loss column. Like that, to me, that it just doesn't resonate with me. And as someone who struggled consistently at the plate throughout my career, I always knew, I'm like, damn, like I could still go out there against the elite, like right-handed, good fastball pitchers, put together some good at-bats, play at a high level in the outfield, and bring something to the clubhouse. So, you know, to answer that guy's question, like, no, they're not going to spend $100 million, but from a fan's perspective, you should never let the GM off the hook that you can go young and you can have prospects, but man, either be young and rebuild or just go all in and spend, $300 million. Like there's no point in spending 150. It's either shed salary or spend a ton.
Very well said, BA. Very well said there. Had Will Venable on Inside the Clubhouse on the Score on Saturday. And I did ask him as part of the plan, knowing where they are in his first year and in the rebuild, I said, if you're losing games 4-2 and it feels gross, like you're blowing leads late in the game, you're kicking the ball all over the outfield and infield, those are awful losses. Like those are catastrophic 4-2. It's a style of play. But if you're losing 4-2 and you're running first to third and you're hitting the cutoff man and you're doing the things that are clean baseball, but you're just coming up short, I can live with that.
No fan will care. They'll be at every game. I mean, if they can afford it, if they see you're trying, they're going to be at every game, and you'll never have a bad thing to say. It's like, man, you know what? They're just a little, they lack the talent, but that will be there through the developmental phase in the next couple of years, and then you go get the pieces to complement that.
Matt Moe on Twitter wants to know, and this is kind of building off of the last series of questions. Your team was last in runs scored last year, 100 less than the next worst team. How do you expect the team to be better this year when you've done almost nothing to address that? You're putting additional pressure on all of the young pitchers to try and stay in games.
I mean, I look at this. It's I shared this with some of the players at some of the high school players I recruited at Northwestern, at Arizona, right? We always talk about you're putting them in some pressure cooker situations. You're asking a lot. This is the fucking big leagues, dude. Like, if you're in the back end of the rotation or the back end of the bullpen, or you're the stop guy to come out and slam the door, like, you should be able to do that at a consistent level, at the big league level, right? So my point is, like, you don't have to necessarily make any massive moves. I just think with different culture and a different expectation and different standard in the clubhouse, you can offset a lot of that bad play that normally they got normalized over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's perfectly said. Look, they are not going to be all that better offensively. I don't expect. You're talking about a lot of guys making their major league debuts in 2025, whether it's breaking camp or coming up somewhat shortly after. I don't expect some big jump in runs scored. I'd like to see a little bit of a gap between 100 runs more in that. There were 30th in runs. I'd like to see a much closer gap to the bottom pack rather than being so distant and just putrid at the plate.
Look, let me ask you this from like White Sox fans or people that have been heavily involved in the organization and just an expectation, right? Is it me, or every time we talk about a badass player or a great team, there's 2 or 3 first year, second year guys that just go off, right?
Yeah.
So exactly. It is not too much to ask. I should have done that. Year 2, like first full year in the big leagues, what stopped me from going off, right? Like, there's on every good team, there's a 22, 23-year-old dude, just like they have on the Phillies, they have, or Texas, right? Or look at Cleveland every single year. They have a couple 23, 24-year-old guys that don't do what I did and go, well, I'm only 24. There's always next year, right? That's a death wish. So I don't think it's too much to ask. Like, hey, we gave you all this money. You're in the big leagues. Like, yes, there'll be some licks you'll take along the way, but somewhere, my college coach used to tell me, somewhere in America, BA, someone's doing this. Like, you don't have to, but they are. So it's like, you can hit 220, but somewhere, somebody in America is hitting 305 with 25 pumps and 80 ribbies as a rookie. Why not you? So some of these guys have got to step up and play. They're big leaguers. You just hit the nail on the head. The White Sox have never had that guy, at least in the last, like, let's call it 10 years. There was all this expectation of that last group. You know, they were ranked number 1 farm system. Moncada was the number 1 prospect. They had 7 of the top 50. Like, they have 6 of the top 59 right now. And everyone's kind of like, I don't care, because I've seen this before. I've seen the guy get to the big leagues and just completely flop. You're right. We see it all over. And Chris sat right here on this couch and talked about the Clevelands and the Detroits. And he said, even the Kansas Cities, mentioned Tampa Bay, and they know who they are. And I told him, you can't, just like you said earlier, you can't try to thread the needle and be a little bit of both. You either you got to know your identity and stick with it. And I do think one thing here might be a change. Like, there's a little bit of hope for me here. I don't expect the White Sox to be locking up any of these guys long-term, like they did with Eloy and Robert and Moncada. Like, here's all your paper. Now come to the big leagues. I don't think that will happen anytime soon. So now, if these guys come up and they get a 2-month runway, maybe a 3-month runway, and they flop, BA, I think they're going back down. I think this is not going to be, well, everyone's hitting 211. It's okay. And to be honest with you,
I would be holding Andrew Vaughn, and I like Andrew. It's time for him. This is a make or break year with the White Sox.
You're spot on. Like Andrew Vaughn just popped in my head, and I got nothing against him. I watched him in college, like when he was at, I believe, Cal, right? And
yep, Cal.
He's incredible. But Andrew, it's like if I'm the coach, it's like, hey, for us to do great this year, and we're behind you, we need you to step up. We need 260 to 280 with 25 or 30 and 80 to 100 RBIs, play first base, DH, we'll platoon you wherever you want to do, but now is your time to shine. And that's not a big ask. You know, you look back at sometimes I used to get frustrated in my career because I was struggling, right? But I'd look over and see some guy be like 220 with 15 homers or 220 with 5 homers. And then next year you'd get arbitration for like $3 million. I'm like, I got torched in the media and, you know, for only hitting 8 or whatever many home runs. And again, you just there's time and place. You have to be able to step up when it counts at some point in your career.
Yeah. I mean, he's almost making $6 million in arbitration. It's time. It's time. All right. Back to the questions. David Crosby. I think I can help answer this one. This is directed to Chris Getz. What role did you play in the Pedro Grifol hire? Followed by SSI Don, who said, I 100% want this asked. He had to recommend that clown, right? So here's what I know about the managerial process. Last tenure, I mean, it was Rick Hahn's call at the end of the day. That was his managerial call. They interviewed him in groups. So Getz was in one of the group, but it wasn't only Getz. It was Getz and some members of the front office, assistant GMs, etc. Then there was Rick. There was Kenny. Kenny was involved, and they all had to recommend to each other who they were bringing in, and they got kicked up the ladder, and eventually that person was flown out to Arizona to meet with Jerry. So that's what I know. Did he have a role in the hiring? I'm not going to let him off the hook and say no. He was in these processes of hiring the next manager. At the end of the day, Rick Hahn did not call Chris Getz, and Jerry didn't call Chris Getz and go, is it Pedro or bust? I don't think that happened. But I do think that Chris was a part of the process that brought Pedro Grifol here, but he wasn't the final answer like he was with Will Venable.
Yes, but I'm gonna answer everyone's question when it applies to this. It is not a coincidence that there are some talented or some people that have had success with the Kansas City Royals organization, and they make their way over to the White Sox. Okay, like whether Chris Getz signed off on it, nudged somebody, had a previous relationship, was in that room and said, yes, this guy is beloved by all players. He's a great executor on infield, management or in-game management. He's great on pitching changes. He's great on skill evaluation, whatever the case may be. If it's Kansas City Royals and it has happened in Chris Getz's tenure, even when he was the head of player development and they shifted over here, Chris Getz has had some sort of verbiage or dialogue about that person. As would I. When I got traded to Boston, right? If someone would have been like, if I took over as the GM of the White Sox, it was like, wait, Dave Magadan's available as the hitting coach. I thrived under him. If he ends up there, best believe I had a say in that. Or Tim Bogart or something, right? Or Brad Mills. Like, of course they're there because I knew I had a previous relationship with them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, did he know Pedro Grifol maybe better than other people? Sure. So maybe that information leaked. But the Royals didn't hire him, or the Royals didn't even interview him. They let him walk. So that was, to me, that was very telling at the time. I got text when Pedro Grifol was hired saying, I can't believe that he got that job. Complete opposite when Will Venable got the job. I haven't heard a person in baseball, from Bruce Bochy on one coast to Alex Cora on another and everybody in between. And Will, everyone to a man has raved about the hiring of Will Venable. Will it work out? We don't know. It's a tough ask to take over this team, but if he's given the time and runway to land this plane, it could be a great marriage. So yeah, I think this process was done right. I think they got the right guy at this particular time. Let's go with this one. Chicago sports fan. How many more decades is the current rebuild going to take?
Oh, man. You want to take that one?
Well, okay. So I asked Chris, I sat here and I said, I don't see a scenario, and I've said this on the podcast, I've said it to you, that the White Sox are competitive before 2027. I don't. And when I say competitive, and I said this to him, that means you're competing for the last wild card spot. That's what competitive means to me. Like at the deadline,
you're in the hunt. If you're in the hunt, no fan will care.
At the deadline, you're actually talking about acquiring a reliever to back, you get the bullpen or a hitter or something like that. I don't see a scenario before 2027. It's probably more realistic. It's 2028, but I'll keep 2027. So the answer to the question, and I understand it's a question of frustration. I get it, because in theory, you go back to 2016 when the first one started. It's been a decade, okay? In theory, it's been a decade to get 2 playoff wins. So I understand how many more decades. If Chris is given the time, and I asked him if he'll have the time, I do think they can be competitive again in like 2028. I do. I think that they, if done right, if done the way, and some of these guys have to hit. Let's be honest, BA. If this all flops again, I don't know. But I do expect them at the back half of this decade to be in the mix again.
Yeah, and to your point, like we discussed previously, if the players that should step up. Benintendi hits another 20 homers, plays good defense, hits upper 2s, low 3s, right? Like what's to prevent
I don't think he'll be a part of that next time they're competitive.
But my point is him and Vaughn and Colson Montgomery, if those guys get called up and guys do their part, there's no reason why you can't be in the hunt. Baseball's a weird game. And I've harped on this before. The same reason why the Miami Marlins will go spank the Yankees in a 3-game set, beat them 2 out of 3, or sweep them in New York. Baseball's just weird like that, but you can't have a 100-run differential and compete. You just can't.
I don't understand this question, and that's why I'm going to bring it up. Shy Sox Billy, who's a fan of the program, said, how long do we plan on delaying the development of our young talent for aged out veterans? I understand, like last year, you had the Nicky Lopez's and the Paul DeYoungs. Those guys, you need those guys when you're doing a rebuild. I don't see a lot of those guys right now taking spots of young players that you're trying to develop. Quite frankly, Paul DeYoung should have been here last year because Colson Montgomery wasn't ready. He did not have a great year at AAA. He needed that entire. One thing I do respect is that they never brought him up. And I asked Colson this like 2 months ago. Did it chap his ass that he didn't get the call because you're coming up at a season that's lost? But you can make an argument that he should have just cooked down there all year. He didn't have a great year. He had like a 28% strikeout rate. Went to fall ball, had a really good 2 weeks, ended on a high note. I don't see a scenario anymore right now. And maybe there'll be 1 or 2 guys that are veterans. And you're blocking this guy. I think they're more in line to let some of these guys cook at the minor league level before they actually develop them and let them fail here.
Well, the good news for the younger guys who have little to no big league experience is the veterans, like nobody's safe. The bad news is nobody's safe. And the good news for them is nobody's safe, right? Like, I went into spring training every year. Shoot, look at 2008. We had Swisher, myself, Carlos Quinton, Alexi Ramirez was even playing center field. We had it was like who's going to come and play, right? Like who's going to come here and earn these couple spots. And so I think if there's guys that go in there with a sense of urgency and a little bit of a fire underneath them, thinking like I might lose my job here. A healthy competitive environment breeds successful players, I think. So I think it's a great setup for the White Sox as far as seeing who's going to step up.
I like this one. This is because it's projection. The Southside boys. Again, I like those guys, fans of the program, fans of BA. Fast forward 2 seasons. Which prospects have now solidified themselves as everyday players in the major leagues?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. Fast forward 2 seasons. So let's say 2027. Which prospects have now solidified themselves as everyday players in the major leagues?
Well, the cliche part is we're going to always go back to the pitching, right? I think Hagen Smith will be up here in a couple of years, cruising either in a closing role or
I think he's asking for. He's saying everyday players, so I think he's looking for
position guys.
I think he's looking for position guys.
I think the easy low hanging fruits like the George Wolko kid. I think. If you eliminate his age and he gets an opportunity, he's one of those kids where you're like, he reminds you know who he reminds me of is a Ryan Sweeney. Ryan Sweeney was 18 in spring training off Bartolo Colon, like whack. He's like, I don't give a shit. Like he didn't care. He's like,
yeah, we need some more
care who it is. Like I'm good. I'm tall. I'm wiry. I can drive the ball over the yard. So I think a kid like him in 2-3 years, you look up and you're like, man, he's our 3-hole hitter and he's 21.
I'm gonna go Braden Montgomery, the guy they just got the high ceiling guy they just got in the Garrett Crochet trade. I mean, he's already. I think they had to kind of put him in the top 50, MLB pipeline because of his talent. He was some teams had him as the number one bat in the draft last year, but the ankle injury in the College World Series took him out of the mix. He fell a few spots in the draft to the Red Sox. The White Sox scouted the hell out of him. They know the kid, the makeup. He was awesome on his Zoom. I know that doesn't mean anything. People don't want to hear, oh, he's a great makeup guy, but I think makeup does matter now a little bit more than it did in the past. His talent, his arm, he projects as a 70 to 80 arm. So the tool.
If I saw it, like I was at Arizona, he was a freshman at Stanford. And I watched him take infield, and he's in right field, and I saw him throw a ball, and I remember going like, I've seen two guys throw from the right side that I could throw like myself in college, right before I had all those surgeries. But like I watched it come out, and it just stayed about 3 feet off the ground all the way to home on a line. And I go, damn. Then he came in to close against us, throwing 98. So, and not that this matters, but we joke about what they look like in a uniform, like Wilco and Luis Robert in a uniform, right? Doesn't get much better than that. This guy looks like an Under Armour mannequin. He's in great shape. He's put together. He's everything you want in a prospect. I mean, it's all there.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with him. I'm going to say one of the two catchers. I'm not going to project which one. I'm going to say Teal or Carroll. Both. One of the two is like your everyday guy. Like, let's just say plug and play for 5 years. I'm going to give you an under the radar, maybe not under the radar, another name. Okay. I'm going to assume Colson will be a guy. He's not going to be, that to me is low hanging fruit. So I'll just wait on that one. Chase Mydroth, the third player in the Garrett Crochet deal. He might be the White Sox second baseman this year. He might break camp as the White Sox second baseman this year.
Why not?
His on-base percentage, I believe, was .437 last year in a full year of AAA. He's not going to be a guy that comes up here and slaps 15. He's not Dustin Pedroia, I don't think. But the way the Red Sox were hesitant to give up on him, I'm going to take a chance. The White Sox haven't had a player like that in a long time. So I'm going to project 2 seasons from now. Chase Mydroth is one of those like scrappy South Side guys that people really latch onto. All right. Todd wants to know, any chance Ozzy's number 13 gets retired?
I think you have to, out of respect, out of accomplishments. I mean, you look at like a Mark Burley, right? Beloved by all. Mark Burley's career numbers are amazing. He was my favorite pitcher to play behind. He's probably the biggest fan favorite. They did right by him, but you go just based off success as a manager, played for the White Sox organization for over a decade, I believe. And he was beloved by all fans. It's like, why not? I don't think anybody else is going to wear that number either.
All right, I'm going to combine a few. I agree with you. This is a no-brainer to me. Ozzy's number, what he's meant to the organization. I think what he's meant in his broadcasting career has mattered, how he's carried that torch, the good times and the bad, and helped White Sox fans get through. I think that matters. His legacy, to me, is forever. So I would retire that number 13, hopefully sooner than later. A couple of combined questions here. I'm going to combine a different Todd and Ken. Ken says, what steps will you take to earn back the goodwill of White Sox fans? Todd wants to know to Chris Getz, what steps have you taken to help ensure this rebuild has a better outcome of the same type of rebuild under Rick Hahn? Rarely does a team become great again after a fire sale trade. We've kind of hit these topics. Like, go back and listen. Chris has put together, and I said this to him, I can't recall somebody in 3 decades that has brought as many voices and people from the outside and other organizations as Chris Getz has brought in. It's a very insular organization, as you know. It's very much a family business. Rick and Kenny were part of that family. They didn't bring in a lot. They were lacking in scouting. They were lacking in metrics. They were lacking in analytics. And Chris has identified all that. He started departments. He created a task force, even with people not in the baseball department, to kind of look around and see what's going on around the game, do some Q&As so he could be away from it to get a 30,000-foot view. Again, it's not a sexy answer, but he is beefing up the necessary things behind the scenes. And the only thing I want to ask you about that is, as a player who has all of the resources available to him or some of the resources available to him, how does that differ?
When I played during my generation, I was kind of coming up on the uptick of every single video, every angle was available, right? Like the metrics and all the data probably wasn't as much as abundant as it was now. That probably would have hurt someone like me. Who knows? But I can remember this. I remember Ozzy specifically telling us, like, guys, if you want to go down the video room or you guys want to head down there to look at something, please do. But if I catch you guys going down there in between at bats to watch yourself strike out and stuff, like, I'm going to get you out of there. So
things have changed.
Times have changed. They got the iPads and stuff all readily available on the benches. And I think there's a lot of value in that. But, Frank Thomas was really big on, like, always watching positive videos of himself. And it's like, how do you argue against that guy, the greatest White Sox of all time? I know he's a freak. He's a bad comparison to the normal human being because he's a freak show because he's so big and strong. But, there's a lot to be said. Like, you could really do some damage, I think, by overanalyzing stuff. I think it helps in game preparation and game management. But again, I think you got to be really careful about when you're struggling. You can go down a rabbit hole and never get out.
Yeah, I think things have definitely changed, and the White Sox, I think, have finally adopted some of the new ways and new philosophies. A couple more here before we wrap things up. There's a lot of questions here, and we certainly appreciate all of the responses. I'm trying to combine a few of these that are similar. We have Greg Sharp and SSI Don, who replied to another tweet. All right, so SSI Don says, "Why does Jerry hate Sox fans?" And Greg says, since Jerry bought the team, they've lost 51% of their games. That means by definition, he is a loser. My question is for Will Venable. What will last longer, your managing the team or the new stadium name? All right. So before I turn it over to you, look, Jerry it's frustrating, right? I get it. They've had back-to-back playoff appearances once. Okay. They're a charter member of the American League. You would, at this point, hope that it's a win at all. That's John Middleton in Philadelphia throwing money at everyone in order to win at this point of his life. But Jerry doesn't want to. He wants to build this thing the right way. And it's a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at that. I don't think he hates White Sox fans, people. I just don't. It feels like that because you're getting no results. When you turn on to watch a game, when you go to a game, you're feeling like you're not getting the return on the investment. I get it. As for the Will Venable question, I think that's a great question.
That's a Brooks Boyer question, man.
I mean, how long will what is it now? It's called Rate Field.
Yeah.
Not guaranteed rate. So it's called Rate Field. Wow. I mean, we just said at the start of this podcast, they've had their 4 managers in 5 years. Probably going to go Rate Field here. I hope I'm wrong.
Wow.
But so anyway, kind of putting, 51, like you saying that they've lost 51% here, Greg, Jerry did bring a World Series to this team, whether you like it or not. If you want to quantify him as a loser, that's for you to decide. But I definitely say that I feel the frustration because you're not feeling like you're getting it back from ownership. But in talks with Chris Getz and everything, the way it's been done, they're bringing SoxFest back. They're trying to cut some costs for Sox fans at the ballpark. No one wants to hear the bullshit I'm spewing right now, but yeah. I just don't think he hates Sox fans. I don't.
I try to look through it through a different lens. I don't blame White Sox fans for having that question, but I also ask them this: like, how could you possibly think you know what it's like to look at an organization through an 87-year-old billionaire's lens, who's in the golden years, in the twilight, kind of like having of his life, right? If we're being honest, and I just can't imagine his vision, as a normal White Sox fan, like trying to think what he's thinking and all he's been through, and being a multiple championship caliber owner with the White Sox and the Bulls. I mean, the guy just operates on such a different wavelength that I don't even try to pretend to know what he's thinking. Yeah, and and this all comes at a time, maybe the darkest time of Chicago sports of my life. I mean, the only coach in Chicago sports, and this goes down to the Sky, the Fire, all of those other teams, the only coach that wasn't fired, and people are like, what about Craig Counsell? David Ross was fired at the GM meetings in November of 23. So basically, the only coach or manager that wasn't fired
last year was Billy Donovan of the Bulls. That's
Wow.
That's how dark it is right now. No one's doing anything. The Bears have bottomed out. The White Sox are the worst team. The Blackhawks are the worst team. The Bulls are stuck in the middle. I get it.
By the way, I got nothing against Mike McCarthy. I've always been like a fan of his, watch him from afar. But
that would be my last question.
It's a dark day in Chicago sports when they're like, wait a minute, Jerry Jones told him to beat it. We'll take you. Like, it's not that he's not a phenomenal coach. Just like Mike Tomlin's a great coach too, right? But it's a dark day when they're like, what fired coach can we hire?
Hey man, the shit sandwich sometimes tastes good. Okay.
Yeah,
like
I ate a few in my day, man.
Just a few more. I'm saving one to the end. I could probably answer this one. Ardan, what's the plan with CHSN? Can we pivot? How about we just put the Sox on the U? I know it's been frustrating. It's been frustrating for people at CHSN. Our friend Chuck Garfine. Certainly, I have a lot of friends, as you guys know from my past from NBC, that made the jump over there. That are doing just outstanding work. The game broadcasts are fantastic when you can see them, and a lot of people can't. And I understand that. From what I've been told, and they're great partners of us here at the Recap CHSN, is that they feel pretty confident a deal will be coming by opening day. I'm not going to sit here and say, I told you so, because I'm just giving you the information I've been given. That by opening day, they do feel Xfinity will come to some type of agreement. I don't know what tier. I don't know if it's going to, it doesn't sound like it's going to be on Hulu or YouTube TV for those of you who subscribe to that. It's a frustrating time, but just know this, everyone around the game is dealing with this RSN stuff. There's 11 teams that completely pulled the plug altogether. There's some teams that don't have a home. Major League Baseball's producing like over 5 teams now. It's a mess. The RSN business is a mess. It's something fans don't want to hear. The White Sox are taking about a $50 million bath in going from NBC to CHSN, roughly $35 to $50 million. They're not getting that money to reinvest into the organization. They're not the only team. The Cubs are facing the same problems at Marquee. The Dodgers are the only team that can keep going out there and signing everybody because they have an $8 billion TV deal. And that's a fact. Yeah. That's a fact. So a couple more, and I'm saving one of my favorites for last here. Will Noah Schultz be on a Garrett? This is from Todd. Todd is also going to have the last question. Will Noah Schultz be on a Garrett Crochet-like inning plan only with it being in the minors, or is he still going to pitch on Saturdays? And is Drew Thorpe going to be ready to pitch in spring training? I think Drew Thorpe is TBD still. I think that they're going to take their time with both. But remember the great podcast we did with John Eli, who had his hands on the
Eli question, man. Just text him. He'll be like, "Oh, he's 6 weeks out."
It's funny because I went back and listened, and he addressed the Noah Schultz situation and said that he would keep him in Charlotte. Yeah. Because he thinks he needs to get his innings down in AAA and not come up here and do that 3 or 4 inning start stuff at the big league level. And so as impatient as Sox fans can be, and you know this, even when you were on those good 90-win teams, it could feel like, hey, there's a guy down there. Just get him up here, get him up here, get him up here. We want Noah Schultz to be the dude like for the next 5 years. I don't really care about every 5th day right now if he's can only pitch 100 innings.
Well, Bobby Jenks, most people don't know, he went through some trials and tribulations injury-wise with the Angels before the White Sox got him. And I know that there were some rumblings when he was in AA throwing 97-mile-an-hour cutters and just obliterating everybody. Like, are we really going to call this guy up from AA? And look how great he was. So, I mean, those are internal problems within the organization that the staff, like the GM and Chris Getz and his staff, have to address, right? Like, that's the administrative problems that you have to be able to say, like, okay, we're not good, but like this guy's dealing and he's he's thrown 50 innings. Let's get him up here. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, that's stuff that I have no patience for. It's like, if he's dealing, he's a big leaguer, get him in the freaking big leagues.
And there was some of that frustration from John in that podcast a couple of weeks ago with some of the guys in the bullpen. When you have a bullpen that's just flopping up here and guys are dealing, and it's Peyton Pallette. I asked Chris, give me a player off the radar. And it's the same one that John said he thought should have been at the big league level a year ago. And I told him that, and he goes, oh, funny. You would know. I love this one. Ben, the first question that comes to mind, how dare you? The second, is there a plan to ultimately pay for a legitimate star, 9-digit offers, when the team is competitive enough to justify it? Ben, if you're still hanging on the line, waiting for this answer, we have addressed it. Chris, I asked him directly at the end of that hour 20, will you sign a $100 million player? And I know some people are like, 100? It's 300 now to do business. There's guys signing 7. Let's get to 100 first, okay? Because we haven't done that. Will you sign a 9-figure deal? He said, I believe so. I challenged him on the believe so. He pushed back and said, yes, it will happen. So and again, not too early. It's not just going to come at a time when they're expecting to win 65 games. It's going to come time when they feel like they are competitive, to your point. All right. One of my favorite questions that was submitted. It's really good, and I had to think about it. Todd Welter. Has Brian Anderson ever told Ken Griffey Jr. that his defensive play in the 2008 blackout game was way cooler than Griffey's?
Well, Griffey made that unbelievable throw, right, to home to nab that guy at home plate to keep it a 1-0 game. But I will always tell people, I get asked all the time, like, what's your favorite big league memory? It's like, yeah, there's some really cool ones, right? Like, I played with some great players. I had some bright spots in my career, but making that catch was awesome. Like, the electricity in the stadium was amazing. It was shaking. I've never seen Jermaine that excited because he's just so vanilla ice cream all the time. He's just like so stoic, But then he was freaking out. But the fun part is if you look at the lineup card, I replaced Ken Griffey Jr. on defense. Now, we've discussed this before. Was he dealing with a couple of knee injuries? Sure. Was he getting a little older? Yeah, but I'm not telling my friends. I'm not telling my daughter that. She can be like, Dad, you play with Ken Griffey Jr.? And I said, yeah. And I told his ass to sit down. I got it. And I made that diving catch, which I didn't. But one of the greatest teammates of all time. And I, as Jim Thome used to tell me, like, sometimes you got to stay in your lane. When I address Ken Griffey Jr., I stay in my lane. He's one of the nicest, greatest teammates ever. You were part of you were up here that entire October run in 05. And the only thing that sucks about 05 is that you guys were so damn dominant that you clinched nothing at home. And, I feel like going back, it was like I was at Wrigley Field when Kyle Hendricks pitched the game of his life to clinch the pennant for the Cubs at Wrigley Field. And I was like, man, this is cool. And I immediately felt like, I wish Sox fans got to do this. I wish Sox fans, but like those atmospheres, that Game 2 atmosphere with Paulie's slam and Pod's walk-off, as electric as a moment I've ever been a part of. But in terms of atmosphere and in your entire life, including the second blackout game, which they tried to replicate in the 2021 playoffs, and they did a damn good job. That was a really cool thing. But of what it meant, game 163, winner goes on, loser goes home. Better environment ever that you've been a part of? No, it was crazy. And then I think they show the video, whoever's announcing the game, they kind of say, Brian Anderson makes the catch, and it pans like right over to Michael Kadire, and he's just like, I'm going like, damn, like that would stink to be on the losing side of that. But my gosh, like you look at that video too, after we're kind of all celebrating, and you see, Chris Getz jumping around, Creedy jumping around. You got Ken Griffey Jr. wearing number 17, which is weird, jumping around. And you're like, look at all these grown men, 3 of which, 4, whatever, how many were Hall of Famers, like jumping around like little kids. And that's really tough to beat, man. Like you look back at that, and that just seems like it was yesterday. It'll be 20 years this year. Yeah, it's crazy. All right, I was going to ask you, I was going to put you on the spot and say, what question would you ask? But you already did it. You started this podcast off, but why wasn't BA invited to SoxFest? So here's me at the end of this inviting you. I will happily take you with me to the Ramova Theater if you'd like to create a scene at the Ramova Theater. I don't think we're looking to create a scene. We're just looking. I don't know. Getzy and I are still buddies, man. The day he pissed me off, I'm going to dress up in some sort of disguise and just absolutely butcher him to death. All right. We appreciate all the responses. Really good ones to me, to BA, to both of us. There were some to Cap as well. We'll do more stuff like this, but I felt like the timing was right. Cubs convention is this weekend as we record this. And it just gets me thinking, like this was a time when you go back 10, 15, 20 years, convention time was always a special time because it meant like, oh God, like it's right there. And we are pretty damn close. And I'm just happy, again, for those of you who go to SoxFest, have a great time. Embrace the new format because at least it's back. BA, appreciate you, brother. We'll do this again soon. See you soon, bud.
All right. This has been the White Sox Recap Podcast. Wherever you listen and download on audio forms, Apple, Spotify, etc. And here on YouTube, we're always here for you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the White Sox Recap Podcast.